Welcome back to the Old Photo Vault channel. The empty parlor, Dorset, England, 1912. The photograph was taken on an afternoon meant for cleaning. Eleanor Price had rolled up her sleeves, moved the chairs onto the table, and opened the window just enough to let in pale air. Dust clung to the ceiling where the paint had begun to peel, and the fireplace smelled faintly of old ash. She didn't remember anyone else being there. Yet, in the developed photo, behind her bent figure, something stands near the hearth. It is shaped like a woman, soft at the edges, watching without expression. Eleanor said later she felt unusually calm that day, as if someone familiar had been keeping her company. She recalled pausing once, holding the broom, unsure why her eyes had filled with tears. The house had belonged to her mother before the fever. When the parlor was finally cleared, Eleanor locked the door. The photo suggests it was never empty at all. The brightest thing left. County Cork, Ireland, 1926. The room had been abandoned carefully, as if no one wanted to offend it. Wallpaper sagged with damp roses, and the floor held a thin skin of dust that did not quite hide the footprints circling the walls. Someone had propped the picture of Christ against the paneling instead of hanging it. The frame tilted, the glass clouded with age. In the photograph, faint shapes gather around it. Smudges that resemble shoulders, bowed heads, faces half-formed and unsure. They do not touch the painting. The light around Christ remains strangely clean. A pale oval, untouched by the mildew and rot creeping through the room. Locals said the house was used briefly as a shelter after the famine years, when prayers were whispered by people who did not stay long. Looking at the image now, it feels as if they never truly left, still drawn to the one thing that never dimmed, waiting for it to notice them back. The One Who Stayed, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 1968. It looks like an ordinary afternoon, the kind meant for showing off a new car. Thomas Miller sat on the trunk in his pressed shirt and slacks, one leg bent, trying to look older than he felt. The neighborhood behind him was clean and bright, fresh paint on porches, summer light resting easily on the roofs. He said later he remembered laughing just before the shutter clicked, though he couldn't recall why. When the photo was developed, a pale shape appeared beside the car window, just behind his shoulder. It is small and incomplete, like a person caught halfway through standing up. Thomas insisted that was where his friend Daniel had been leaning, teasing him about the car. Daniel had drowned 2 weeks earlier in the river. Thomas never sold the car. He said it always felt like someone was still riding with him, quiet, familiar, and unwilling to be left behind. The Measured Waist, London, England, 1898. The photograph shows a woman standing firmly, hands set at her hips, her posture trained into stillness. She's wearing a tightly laced corset, drawn inward far beyond what the body naturally allows. At the end of the 19th century, this practice, known as tight lacing, was not unusual. A narrow waist signaled refinement, discipline, and social respectability, especially among middle and upper-class women. Corsets made from whalebone or steel were gradually tightened over months or years, reshaping the ribcage and compressing internal organs. Medical journals of the time warned of fainting, restricted breathing, digestive problems, and long-term skeletal damage. Yet fashion columns continued to praise the silhouette. The woman's face is absent from the frame, but her body tells the story clearly. Beauty defined by measurement, endurance mistaken for grace. This image is not meant to frighten. It quietly documents how cultural ideals once demanded that women reshape themselves, literally, to fit an expectation that left lasting marks beneath the fabric. The Quiet Guest, Bremen, Germany, 1911. The sitting room was arranged for a long afternoon indoors. Clara Weiss sat upright on the sofa, her book resting open in her lap, lace cushions set carefully behind her back. A small table held fresh greenery, and the curtains were drawn just enough to soften the light. She remembered the room being silent, save for the clock marking time in polite intervals. When the photograph was developed, a faint figure appeared near the edge of the frame, standing close to the floor, its outline blurred and incomplete. Clara said she had felt a brief chill while reading, a sense of being observed that passed as quickly as it came. The house had once belonged to her sister, who died young and was seldom mentioned afterward. Nothing else in the image seems disturbed, yet the figure remains, neither approaching nor leaving, as though it had only stopped by, content to be present without asking to be seen. The Unregistered Seat, St. Louis, Missouri, 1964. The photograph was taken at the end of a long orientation day, when everyone was told to sit still and smile. Rows of nursing students filled the lecture hall, white caps neat, skirts pressed, hands folded in practiced patience. Someone had counted the chairs twice, making sure there were enough. Nothing seemed out of place. Later, when the picture came back, a faint figure appeared between two women in the middle row. Its edges blurred, its face less certain than the others. No one remembered sitting beside anyone new. The registrar's list matched the visible faces exactly. One nurse said she recalled a strange warmth on her arm during the photo, as if someone had leaned close. She assumed it was nerves. The hospital had closed a tuberculosis ward the previous winter. Patients were moved quietly, names crossed out, beds left behind. The figure does not smile. It simply sits, as though still waiting for instruction. The cradles that would not empty. Rouen, France, 1903. The baskets were stacked carefully along the wall, as if waiting to be chosen again. Wicker sides bowed slightly with age, their white linings yellowed, stitched by hands that expected use. This room once belonged to a maternity ward, quiet except for the soft work of nurses and the small sounds of breathing. When the hospital closed the wing, the cradles were stored and forgotten. Years later, someone photographed them, remarking on how the fabric still seemed neatly arranged, uncollapsed by time. In the image, the interiors appear uneven, as though something light had pressed down and then lifted away. A few nurses claimed they heard faint movements here after dusk, a rustle no draft could explain. The records list infants who never went home, names written once and never revised. Looking at the photograph, it feels less like abandonment than hesitation, as if something small and unfinished never learned how to leave. The mark beneath the shirt, Montana Territory, 1889. The men had dressed as neatly as they could manage. Sleeves buttoned, boots wiped against the step before sitting down. The man in the white shirt stood at the center, his vest unfastened, his expression calm in the way men practiced for photographs. At first glance, nothing seems unusual. Only later does the detail emerge. On his chest, just below the collarbone, a second face appears, faint but deliberate, formed by shadow and stain. It looks outward, not at the camera, but to the side, as if distracted by something unfinished. No one remembered a mark like that on his clothing. The shirt was borrowed that morning from a locker near the quarry office, one left behind after an accident the year before. The man wearing it said he felt an odd pressure while posing, as though someone were leaning forward through him. The photograph suggests the shirt remembered who last filled it and refused to forget. The Last Passenger, Brandenburg, Germany, 1973. The accident had already drawn a small crowd by the time the photograph was taken. The bus leaned forward at an awkward angle, its windshield shattered. The car folded into itself, as if pressed by an invisible hand. Men stood quietly, unsure where to look, waiting for instructions that did not come. The driver's door hung open, and the steering wheel was bent slightly off-center. No one remembered seeing anyone inside the bus after the crash. Yet, in the developed image, a pale figure sits behind the wheel, its face smooth and indistinct, hands resting where hands should be. It does not appear injured. It appears settled. One officer said he felt watched while standing near the bus, a calm certainty that everything necessary had already happened. The route sign above the windshield still reads its destination, unchanged. Looking at the photograph now, it feels less like a haunting than a conclusion, as if something had arrived on time, taken its seat, and quietly brought the journey to an end. The driver who never sold it. Detroit, Michigan, 1947. The car sat inside the showroom long after newer models arrived, its leather cracked but carefully cleaned, the steering wheel polished by habit rather than use. Mechanics said no one remembered who brought it in. It simply appeared one morning, parked perfectly between two modern sedans, keys resting on the seat. When the photograph was taken, the interior looked ordinary. Dust on the floorboard, the faint smell of oil and old tobacco. Only later did people notice the impression in the driver's seat, pressed deep as if someone had just risen. The wheel was turned slightly left, a familiar preference. A salesman mentioned feeling watched whenever he sat inside, a calm patience that discouraged him from touching anything. Records showed the car's original owner died before trading it in, refusing newer engines, newer shapes. Looking at the image now, it feels less abandoned than claimed, as if someone still comes by to check on it, making sure it hasn't gone anywhere without him. The one who watched from the trees, Virginia, United States, 1919. The photograph was meant to be simple. Margaret Hale stood in the clearing behind her family's house, hands folded, dress newly pressed, her hat tilted just enough to keep the sun from her eyes. The woods behind her were familiar, a place she had walked since childhood, where nothing ever seemed to change. She remembered the air being still that afternoon, the birds quiet, as if waiting. When the image was developed, someone noticed a face among the trees just behind her left shoulder, pale, oval, and intent, shaped from shadow and bark. It does not belong to the forest, yet it blends into it easily. Margaret said she felt an odd certainty while posing, a sense of being followed without fear. Years earlier, her younger sister had wandered into those woods and was found hours later, silent and confused, unable to explain where she had been. The face in the photograph does not approach. It only watches, as though it never learned how to leave. The one who didn't step forward. Kolkata, India, 1986. The photograph was taken in the narrow doorway just before dinner. Aaron stood behind Mira with his arms around her, both of them smiling in the familiar way people do when the camera belongs to family. The calendar on the wall was still turned to the previous month, and the kitchen light hummed softly, unnoticed. In the background, their daughter leaned into the frame, half hidden by the door, amused at being included at the last second. For years, everyone believed that was all. Later, when the photo was examined more closely, another face appeared lower in the doorway, faint and unfinished, as if pressed into the air itself. It does not smile. It does not look at the camera. Mira said she remembered feeling crowded that evening, though only 3 chairs were set at the table. Their youngest son had died the winter before, quietly, in his sleep. In the photograph, the family of 4 is complete, even if one of them never learned how to step into the light. The Borrowed Calm, New Mexico Territory, 1907. The photograph was meant to be playful. Samuel Ortega sat in a wicker chair with the young burro folded gently into his arms, as patient as a child rocked to sleep. The studio backdrop showed a painted countryside, and someone had written "Rock-a-bye baby" at the bottom in careful script. Samuel remembered the animal's warmth, the steady breath against his chest, the way its eyes seemed almost thoughtful. When the image was developed, another detail surfaced. At the base of the tree painted to one side, a human face appeared, pale and watchful. pressed into the bark as if it belonged there. Its expression mirrors the burrow's calm too closely to ignore. Samuel said he felt oddly comforted during the sitting, as though something else had settled nearby. The burrow was later sold and lived a long, quiet life. The face in the tree remained, suggesting that whatever lent its calm that day never learned how to leave the frame. The Man Who Carried Another. Yukon Territory, Canada, 1901. The photograph names him simply as a trapper, written in careful ink along the top edge. He stands in open ground with his rifle balanced on one shoulder, pipe held loosely in his mouth, looking patient in the way men learn to look when nothing moved for miles. His coat is heavy, worn thin at the seams, and the animal pelt hangs limp against his chest. At first, the image feels honest and plain. Then the second face appears, pressed into the slope of his shoulder, pale and intent, eyes open as if mid-thought. It does not strain or speak. It rests there, familiar. The man later told a trading post clerk that winters felt longer after his partner died on the trail, that he sometimes felt weight where no pack hung. He kept trapping alone. In the photograph, he has not let go yet. The land behind him is wide enough to swallow a man, but it seems he brought one back with him instead. The steppe that was still warm, Tuscany, Italy, 1924. The garden was kept in careful order. Gravel raked smooth each morning, hydrangeas watered just before the sun reached the wall. The stone steps led through the archway into a smaller courtyard, a path everyone used without thinking. On the afternoon the photograph was taken, no one recalled anyone walking there. The house was quiet, the doors closed, the air unmoving. When the image was developed, a faint figure appeared mid-step, head bowed slightly, its outline soft as if caught between moments. It seems neither entering nor leaving. The stones beneath it looked darker, as though recently warmed by weight. The gardener said he paused that day for no reason, one foot lifted, suddenly unsure whether someone had just passed him. Years earlier, the previous owner had died on those steps after returning from the fields, collapsing without a sound. In the photograph, the garden remains unchanged, but the step appears occupied, patiently waiting to be finished. The One Who Didn't Catch Up, Kent, England, 1918. The photograph was taken on a mild afternoon when laughter came easily again. Edward sat comfortably in his chair, hat balanced on his knee, smiling with the relief of someone who had survived. Beside him, Thomas leaned on his crutch, tipping his cap toward the camera, proud of how well they both looked. The road behind them stretched quietly past the trees, empty and familiar. Neither man remembered anyone else being there. When the image was developed, a third figure appeared far down the path, faint and upright, walking without haste. The distance softens his features, but the uniform is unmistakable. Edward said he felt a sudden tightening in his chest when he first saw the photo, a recognition without surprise. Their unit had marched that same road months earlier, one man falling behind after a shell burst. They waited, then moved on. In the photograph, he is still following, close enough to be seen, too far away to ever arrive. The One Who Didn't Cross, Adirondack Mountains, New York, 1905. The afternoon was meant to be light-hearted. The water was shallow, cold, but clear, and the women laughed as they lifted their skirts and stepped carefully from stone to stone. One held the other's hand, steadying her against the current, their hats tipped low against the sun. The photograph was taken quickly before anyone lost balance. When it was developed, a third figure appeared in the stream behind them, blurred and upright, standing where the water runs fastest. It does not reach for a hand. It does not move forward. The shape is pale, unfinished, as if the river itself had tried to remember someone and failed halfway through. Years later, a local guide said a young woman had drowned there one spring, slipping on wet rock while the others made it across. Looking at the image now, it feels as though the river kept her, placing her back where the crossing always breaks, quietly watching others pass where she could not. The chair that remembered. Lyon, France, 1909. The room was arranged for quiet evenings. The clock on the wall kept steady time, the mantel carefully dusted, small porcelain figures placed exactly where they belonged. The armchair near the fireplace was rarely used, reserved for reading or brief rests before supper. On the day the photograph was taken, no one recalled anyone sitting there. The house had been empty since morning, the curtains drawn to soften the light. When the image was developed, a pale figure appeared beside the chair, standing close, its outline faint but unmistakably human. It seems to lean slightly, as if expecting the chair to offer support. The woman who owned the house said she often felt someone pause there in the evenings, a presence patient and familiar. Her husband had died in that chair years earlier, slipping away quietly while the fire burned low. In the photograph, the clock continues ticking, the chair remains ready, and someone appears to have come back right on time. The dog who looked past us, Des Moines, Iowa, 1958. The kitchen was arranged for a small joke, nothing more. The dog was lifted onto the table, a pink scarf tied carefully at his neck. Grapes set out as if he might consider them. The toaster hummed softly, and the shelves held their familiar jars, unchanged for years. Everyone laughed when the shutter clicked. The dog did not. He was looking slightly to the left of the camera, ears tight, eyes fixed on something that did not belong to the room. When the slide was developed, a pale shape appeared near the toaster. Tall and narrow, its face suggested rather than shown. No one remembered a reflection there. The house had been quiet since the grandmother died the previous spring, her chair empty, her morning routines unclaimed. The dog refused to enter the kitchen afterward, stopping at the doorway, watching patiently. In the image, his gaze makes sense. He was not posing. He was waiting for someone to finish passing through. The gate left open. Northumberland, England, 1932. The cemetery had been quiet for years. Its iron gate left ajar only because no one remembered when it was last closed. Grass grew tall around the stones, and the names nearest the path had softened into unreadable curves. The photograph was taken at night to test a new camera. Nothing more. The flash caught the gate, the uneven ground, the pale shapes of markers leaning inward, as if listening. Later, a figure appeared between the posts, thin and upright, its edges dissolving into the dark. It stands exactly where the path narrows, neither inside nor out. The man who took the picture said he felt an unexpected pause while walking away, a hesitation that made him turn back once. He saw nothing then. In the image, however, something seems to be waiting, patient and unfinished, as though the open gate was not an invitation, but a reminder that leaving had never been agreed upon. Before we end, remember, every photograph you've seen tonight once belonged to an ordinary moment. A walk, a laugh, a quiet evening, a place meant to be forgotten. And yet, something stayed. If these images made you pause, unsettled you, or lingered longer than you expected, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. More forgotten photos are waiting, and some of them may already be watching.